Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And to continue and in fact conclude with the series of videos that I have done over the course of this month of October 2020, I would like to today talk about yet another film that in one way or another I feel has something to do with this current spirit and tradition of Halloween. So without further ado, let me now share with you some thoughts and comments that I have about this outlandish, outrageous, extraordinary work of art that continues to surprise and delight and utterly confuse and leave me in a sense of bewilderment every single time I see it. And I love the film for that. I'll try to explain why. It's this film from 1977, Nobuhiko Obayashi's work, which is the Japanese horror comedy, colorful extravaganza par excellence. The film is House, and it is in essence a horror film that is about a house and some kind of sinister, maybe supernatural goings on involving a group of young girls and their interactions with the people there and certain surprises along the way. And so let me just leave it at that, because I want to preserve as many of the surprises and shocks and scares and WTF moments as possible, because this is truly a wonderfully rich and dense type of WTF experience in the best possible sense of that. And I mean that 100% complimentary. This is a wonderful swirl of a delight, of a zany sense of swiftness and style that has a lot of color, that has a lot of the sense of the pastiche and collage in terms of composition of images translated into the cinematic expression. And we see the sense of compositions, of overlaps, which have a very, I think, directly relevant technique about them. They are, I think, meant to call attention to themselves and to remind us that this is an expression, an artistic expression that is created by these great artists. It is also a film that is wonderfully inventive and stylish with regard to how it expresses its horror elements. And my goodness, the expressions of horror in this film are utterly creative, very inventive in design, and also quite ingenious in terms of how simple they might seem. And yet when they are achieved and when we see them, as I say, viewers like myself are left wondering, oh my goodness, is that really what is that really what I think I saw? And so this is one of those visual delights and treats that just boggles the mind and the senses and really upends our expectations, leaves us feeling off balance, off kilter, and feeling, as I say, in terms of my own experience, confused and bewildered, feeling like I want to know more about this. But the more I try to know, or the more I try to engage, the more I realize that it's really consuming me and surrounding me, and I'm being, say, devoured by its powers and its beautifully established excesses and tricks of camera and cinema, such that it becomes an all-encompassing experience. And that's great. That's really great. I mean, one of the great things about cinema is the way it makes us feel and it affects us. And one of the ways of real positive and quite evocative modes of feeling affected is the idea of a an all-encompassing experience. And I believe Hausu is one of those all-encompassing experiences. When you watch it, you're just suddenly absorbed into it, which is a really genius feat on many levels. And as I say, this film is, for me, and I've mentioned this before, it's an utterly baffling film, and I think that's one of the great strengths about it. It doesn't yield its answers to its mysteries directly, and I think that leaves itself really nicely to multiple viewings and to try to search for meaning. Or, on the contrary, it could be also an indication of experiencing or trying to experience this film from a different sort of perspective, namely not necessarily trying to look at it in terms of a plot point A leads to plot point B, leads to plot point C, and leads to conclusion plot point D, but rather plot point A leads to something about a plot point B, but then that turns into this spiral, myriad swirl of a beautifully color paletted, designed sense of chaos and abstraction that leads to many possibilities. And that kind of feeling of frenzy and abandon, I think, is at the heart of what makes this film truly magical and special and a one-of-a-kind experience for many people concerned. And I think also that we can look at this film in terms of its horror modes, in terms of its horror expressions, and we can really get a sense of the types of definitions and homages and linkages that are being made to, say, the horror genre writ large, or the Japanese folklore or ghost tale tradition, in terms of this idea of a locale, of a setting, and the way in which the horror elements are expressed, many of which, in terms of their design and introduction and implementation, can also be said to have their roots in a traditional Japanese folklore perspective. So there's plenty of, say, Japaneseness, for lack of a better phrase, beautifully embedded into the fabric of this film. It's not just, of course, these notions of Japanese folklore, but there are also ways that the film's presentation itself is very suggestive of this sort of composition style of film, composition style of storytelling, which is also, I think, having its roots in very traditional ways of folklore storytelling in and of itself, leading up into the 20th century. And then this is, of course, connected to, say, expressions of artistically rendered story in, say, the Japanese comic book manga form. And I think we can identify also the use of the squares and the way that elements seem to appear and disappear. It seems to have a pop art type of motif going on, which I think can be said to be in line with, or perhaps in conjunction with, or otherwise reminiscent of, a type of manga-like grammar. And so I find this to be very exciting and very refreshing. And also that leads to the situation of the possibilities are endless and infinite, meaning anything can happen, which is, I think, a wonderfully brilliant position to be in. This also has, in terms of its storytelling and themes, it has other roots in terms of Japaneseness, the idea of the circle of friends, and they are schoolmates, and they are off in terms of a summer vacation, and so we get these traits of the school and the students and their banter and their repartee and talking back and forth, and these are the types of dialogues that seem to be very prevalent in similar types of stories. But the film uses these elements and plays along with them, also seems to be poking fun at them, seems to be upending them and turning them inside out. And so we see a lot of usages and homages and also satirical points raised to no end, such that, as I say, we are left in a wonderfully myriad, complex view of many different forms of artistic expression and entertainment. And speaking of which, also, the collage type feel of the film is, of course, very reminiscent, and many people have commented on this already, of the type of commercialism and the almost barrage, if you will, of the commercial aspect of modern society. And so we have, in other words, flash images that appear quite constantly, and the notion of the presentation of certain styles or personages or things that appear to be very reminiscent of TV commercials, and this kind of pop art flash style, which I think leads itself into a really interesting cinematic visual conversation with the other more quote-unquote traditional folk tale type of traits and foundations that I think this film is also founded upon. So we have an interesting interplay between, for lack of a better phrase, the modern and the traditional. But as I say, the film doesn't necessarily give us a victor in such conversation one way or another, but in fact it seems to be a swirl of everything and many more aspects, and it gives us in that swirl a sense of confusion, of not quite knowing what is going on, of being funny and bright and with bright colors, then also being suddenly shocking and gory and quite devilish and winking to the audience every step of the way. And so there is a lot going on here, and it is packed to the brim. It is dense. It is very nuanced, and at the same time it feels fresh. It feels like a fun time. It feels like a grand entertainment that just takes you in so many places, and it never lets up. And so, as I say, there are many ways, I think, to look at this film and watch this film, which is, I think, reflective of how actually quite dense and quite complex this film is. And as I say, every time I personally engage with the film, I feel so confused in a delightful way. And I always think, my goodness, I'm watching something and it is suddenly turning into something else before my very eyes. Is this surrealism at its finest? Is this pop art? Is this pop art to the max? Is this a new avant-garde way of looking at Japanese folklore? Is this a kind of veiled satire on the modern trends of commercialism? Is this a take or a satire or an homage to modern Japanese drama? Is this a film? Is this a living, breathing thing? Is this something that is of its time? Is it timeless? And I think it is. If you had to choose a multiple choice, A, B, C, or D, D being all of the above, I would choose D. All of the above, and I would write next to it, all of the above and more, ... circle, underline. That is, I think, for me, the essence of how I experience this film, Hausu, every time I watch it. It's a film that, to end on this, it's a film that feels also like it is really something that is being made. It feels like someone is actually working with it and tangibly working with the frames and making cutouts and making compositions and purposely using different forms of pictorial composition. Skylines seem out of whack, overly saturated and bright, and compositions seem to be a little bit off kilter in terms of what's happening in the foreground and background. Characters seem to be acting in a different plane of existence than other characters do, and I love that. I love that it leaves me totally off balance and leaves me again, WTF, what is going on here? But that is a wonderful state of being to find oneself in, at least for me, when I'm watching a film, any film, because it means that it is affecting me. It means that it is getting at the very heart of that kind of feeling of dread or unease, the idea of the unknown and not being sure, feeling off balance. And then you can, and at the same time, you can smile and laugh and have a good time every step of the way. And I think this is something that is at the beating heart of this film, House. And so this is the wonderful, epic Japanese master classic from the filmmaker Obayashi. So this is from 1977, House. Okay, my friends, so that's it. And so thank you very much for your time and your contributions and your patience throughout the course of this month of October. I really appreciate it, very much so. And I hope that you are well. And I look forward to meeting all of you again very, very soon. But in the meantime, as always, please continue to watch a lot of great, great movies. Stay strong and stay safe. Warmest regards to all of you, my dear friends. And cheers.